hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 131 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday late afternoon with me here in New York. If you're checking out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, share, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you're catching up with this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. So this episode will feature the 10th entry in our continuing series of most underrated film performances. We're going to throw a little wild card at you. A film and an actor who are both very well respected, beloved. The movie is certainly up there when you talk about greatest summer movies ever. And the actor at various points was the biggest movie star in the world, but isn't necessarily known for his acting chops. It's not Marlon Brando. It's not Paul Newman. It's not Daniel Day-Lewis. The movie is the 1990 Paul Verhoeven science fiction mindfuck Total Recall. The actor is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I remember I was an Arnold fan from the first time I watched The Terminator. I knew who he was. I had a vague idea that, he was a bodybuilding champion. But back in my day, if you're somebody who was born in the early to mid 1970s, it's not like you can click a couple of buttons on your phone and look at pictures and or video of 19-year-old Arnold Schwarzenegger walking around at 240 pounds, pretty ripped, and saying, holy shit, you could see he was big, but I didn't know he looked like this. You had to have stumbled across something to understand, oh my God, this guy was 6-time Mr. Olympia. Holy crap. He is just jacked. So Arnold was, I want to say, 7-time Mr. Olympia. I believe he won, that's the biggest honor that you can win in professional bodybuilding. It's basically a worldwide competition, the IFBB, International Federation of Bodybuilders, Mr. Olympia. And Arnold, if I'm not mistaken, won from 1970 to 75, and then he famously came back in 1980 and very controversially won another Mr. Olympia. So his background was in that, but he had already dipped his toe into the movie business with the first Pumping Iron film, which took into account the 75 Mr. Olympia in Pretoria, South Africa. Also a very controversial finish. Many people believe that, Lou Ferrigno ended up finishing third, and Serge Nubret probably should have won that show. Serge Nubret was an extraordinary bodybuilder. And he was just dialed in, and there was a lot of chatter at the time of the contest because they were making this movie. They were going to force Serge to drop out, and it's a little bit messy. Nobody knows for sure exactly what happened, but the fact that Ferrigno only got third, that was an upset in and of itself. Serge Nubret really threatened to mess things up even more than he actually did, because Nubret was just an incredible bodybuilder. What an amazing physique. Now, they all had amazing physiques at that level, but that's besides the point. Arnold made a movie in 76 with a very young Jeff Bridges, Stay Hungry, directed by, I believe, Bob Rafelson, who had done 5 Easy Pieces, very talented, part of that crop of auteur directors that were able to make very personal films during the 70s, especially under the banner of the studio system. So Arnold showed himself as somebody who wanted to learn and wanted to do more than just make silly movies like Hercules in New York, where they had to dub him because his Austrian accent was so thick. That was in the early 70s. But as I say, I saw Terminator on HBO, and I wasn't exactly rooting for Arnold to kill Michael Biehn and Linda Hamilton. But at the same time, I liked the guy. I liked the fact that he was so physically intimidating and imposing. It's one of the best bits of casting that Hollywood has had in the last 50 years. It's up there, maybe not quite Christopher Reeve in the original Superman movies of the 70s and 80s, but Arnold Schwarzenegger as Terminator, that era Arnold, still in his mid-30s, still absolutely jacked, perfect. So I was a fan, and I never saw Raw Deal, and I didn't see Commando in that era. But I must have watched the original Terminator 10 times. Now, if somebody had asked me when I was a little kid, is he a good actor? I don't know if I would have said, oh yeah, he's amazing. He's up there with anybody. But I liked his performance style. And I liked the fact that he was able to be expressive with his body, with his eyes, and with the way that he moved his face around. So I had some idea. But the idea with Arnold, he's not really a master thespian. But he's somebody that has enormous, almost limitless charisma. Like his whole life, there's very little in his life that is an accident. A huge part of his successes is the fact that he has been able to get along with so many different people who on the surface you would not have expected him to be able to get along with. And that even transferred over when he was governor of California, now more than 20 years ago that he took office, and Gray Davis was very unpopular in the state. Everybody was practically in the state. It was like a 20% approval rating. But the idea was, even though Arnold made enemies as a politician, he built more bridges, and there were people that liked him as a politician that you wouldn't have expected it. And part of it was just his natural ability to relate to people who weren't exactly the same as himself. And this is part of the magic of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so I saw Predator, didn't see it in theaters. Red Heat I saw in theaters with my father. That was 1988 with Jim Belushi. Not great. It's one of his lesser films, certainly of the 80s and 90s. There are those that would say it's the worst movie that he made in either, once he started getting going with the Conan films, Red Heat is not great. Arnold's great in it. It owns that movie. He pretty much runs Jim Belushi off the screen, in my opinion. I love Twins. I saw Twins. I probably watched it a dozen times. I loved it then. And then, people saw for the first time, wait a minute, he can actually be funny. Because they would, and you could look this up, there were people saying as far back as the 1970s that Arnold, even though English was not his first language, he's actually fucking hilarious. That he has the ability to tell jokes in not his native language and make it seem as if he knows what he's saying. He just was one of those special people. And to this day, you could say he is one of those special people. That he's had so many different facets and different types of things that he's gotten into and been into. So by the time the movie Total Recall was in the planning stages, and Arnold had a big year in 1990, and I was, bear in mind, 16 years old in 1990, an impressionable youth, didn't really have much good going on in his life, but very sort of prone to what you might call hero worship, or looking up to somebody who is not really a role model in the general sense of being a role model. But I hadn't heard of this book. Do you know what the name of the book? It was a Philip K. Dick book. It's a great title. Philip K. Dick was famous for his titles, which seem absurd. Blade Runner. You know what the book title of Blade Runner was? Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Do you know what the original title of the book, which became Total Recall, was? We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. That was the name of the book. We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. And Blade Runner, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? That actually kind of gives you a clue into the movie that Ridley Scott ended up making, just that title. But don't think the movie works as well if Blade Runner is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And sure as fuck, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale doesn't really light up the marquee during the summer movie season. But I remember when Total Recall came out, and Arnold already, on the strength of, as we say, Predator, Commando had been a big hit. The Running Man, which, I mean, they're talking about doing a remake and a reboot, and Stephen King was never really a fan of it. Loves Arnold, but he never liked that particular adaptation of his work. I thought The Running Man was fucking awesome. I would say that if somebody, and I hope nobody does this, if somebody were to put a gun to my head right now, and I had to answer the question, which Arnold Schwarzenegger film have you seen the most? The Running Man. Yet another one of those 80s movies, like Cocoon, like The Natural with Robert Redford, like Chariots of Fire, HBO and Cinemax just ran it over and over and over. And every time The Running Man was on, it was appointment TV. $200 on Richards. $200 on Richards. Agnes, you can't pick a runner. You have to pick a stalker. I can take anyone I choose. And I choose Ben Richards. That boy is one mean motherfucker. Top 10 greatest lines in any movie in the 80s. The old lady discussing Arnold's character in The Running Man. That boy is one mean motherfucker. Now think about that quote, because it applies to Total Recall. And in Total Recall, which, as I say, had the pedigree of a great filmmaker in Paul Verhoeven, a phenomenal filmmaker who had made his fortune. He's Dutch. He worked with Rutger Hauer. Speaking of Blade Runner, they made movies like Soldier of Orange. And Paul Verhoeven, who also did Basic Instinct, which I very recently discussed on the channel, Verhoeven was, from a visual standpoint, he just had an extraordinary eye. He always knew where to put the camera. And what he's able to do in Total Recall is seamlessly blend mechanical, practical, and computer effects in a way that is believable. And not every filmmaker knows how to shoot in such a way, because he's already calculating which effect is going to go here, which is going to go there, and he's shooting accordingly so that it looked seamless in 1990. So I was excited for Total Recall. I didn't go to the movies that much, but as I say, I had seen these Arnold films. I had already seen Twins. Red Heat sucks, but I still watched it 6 or 7 times after seeing it in theaters. Predator, I used to watch a lot. And The Running Man over and over and over. So I was ready for Total Recall. And here's something that I remember. The late, great film critics, and I talked about them a lot, and I'm going to continue to talk about them because they had a big impact on my young movie-going life and fandom. Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune, Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times. And they had the TV show Siskel and Ebert, and each guy wrote for those newspapers. That was not part of the act. Gene Siskel really wrote a movie column, used to file once a week on Friday. Well, Thursday night, they would publish it in Friday's paper for the Chicago Tribune. And Roger Ebert, Pulitzer Prize winner, wrote for the Chicago Sun-Times. And they had a movie review show, Siskel and Ebert, where they famously did not give a star rating on the show. They gave star ratings in their reviews. And Ebert used the old school method of a 4-star system, from 0 stars to 4 stars. Many people use a 5-star system, and some prefer a 10-star system. I don't really give a shit. That's not something that I ever lost any sleep over, nor will I. But on the show, they didn't give you a star rating. But there were certain movies that Roger Ebert, for example, gave 2.5 stars, that on the show, he gave the old thumbs down. And other movies, he gave 2.5 stars, and he gave a thumbs up. So when Total Recall hit, I watched Siskel and Ebert. I happen to, you're a kid. You don't have unlimited access to do what you want when you want. For me to watch Siskel and Ebert, I had to be home at a certain time on a certain day. And as a 16-year-old kid, my mom, who lives in Florida now, she's great. But if mom had happened to say, Jay, get in the fucking car, we're going to the mall, I'm not watching Siskel and Ebert. But I happened to see that week's Siskel and Ebert, and I don't remember offhand, and I'm certainly not going to Google something as insignificant as this, what movies were playing. And what movies opened and what were Siskel and Ebert. So they talked about Total Recall. And they talked about Ebert loved the movie. And he led with this: there are people who will dismiss what Arnold Schwarzenegger does in this movie because it's him. The implication being, he's not known. He's not Marlon Brando. He's not Daniel Day-Lewis. Day-Lewis had already won an Oscar for My Left Foot. He was already like, this guy is fucking Olivier. He's not Olivier. Arnold is not those people, but he does something here that you don't expect. And so in actual point of fact and reality of watching the movie Total Recall, Arnold doesn't play the main character of Doug Quaid. Yes, he ends up being an action hero in the diegetic world of the story. He does crazy James Bond science fiction type daring do stuff in the world of this movie. But he does not march through the story like an indestructible Terminator character. He doesn't even march through the story like his character in True Lies a number of years later. Or Eraser, where he's even more indestructible, incredibly, in the movie Eraser. I don't even know how Arnold survived that movie, did he? He get blown up how many times? Like the Energizer Bunny. But Total Recall, without beating you over the head with it, gives Arnold an opportunity to do something that he had not been asked to do, which was create two different characters. You have the protagonist, the main character of Doug Quaid, who is a construction worker in a kind of futuristic society and keeps having these weird dreams of Mars and some hot woman that he apparently is with, but he's married to Sharon Stone, and there's something fucked up. So he has these dreams, he wants to go to Mars, and Sharon, I don't like the planet, sweetie, we're doing great here, and a little bit of back and forth in the early part of the movie. But there'd be no movie if things didn't go haywire. Arnold ends up on the run as this Doug Quaid with all of these weird memories of Mars. And he gets help from somebody he's never seen before, and he gets a briefcase with a video of himself. And it turns out he's not really Doug Quaid. This character that we've gone through the first, 40 or 45 minutes, and there's bad guys chasing him, and there's, we're not really even sure who's really the bad guy, and who is, we think this is the bad guy, but it's actually, he's working for someone else. There's a lot of mysterious elements, incredible action sequences, and great, real sci-fi stuff that's not just thrown in there so they can call a science fiction film. There's ideas of terraforming and ideas of atmosphere processors, which we saw also in James Cameron's Aliens. And, people looking to build a new life on a new planet. Star Trek, Genesis, Life from Lifelessness, all of this kind of stuff is in this movie. It's a feast for the eyes, and there's a lot to chew on for the brain. But Arnold meets himself. He realizes that he's called Doug Quaid. As far as he knows, he's Doug Quaid. But now he's being told, actually, in the immortal words of Arnold himself, talking to Doug Quaid, Arnold, you are not you. You are me. Actually, Doug Quaid is someone called Hauser. And he goes into this labyrinthine, serpentine explanation of this and that, and this guy, Cohagen is evil, and you have to do this, and you need to meet this person, and this is a woman of your dreams, and they go through all of this stuff. So needless to say, he meets the woman of his dreams, literally. He meets her and goes through more crazy adventures. And then it turns out, I won't spoil it, Hauser is not exactly who he seems to be. And the reason why I won't spoil it is because I just want to focus, in this instance, on what Arnold is able to do. The character of Hauser, Arnold playing this second character of Hauser, it is very limited. It's not like, and we've seen movies where you have an actor playing Kevin Kline and Dave, another of my most underrated performances, where you see Kevin Kline as President Bill Mitchell in a couple of scenes. We get an idea of his personality. We figure out, okay, this guy's pretty much of a scumbag. Whatever idealism he had in his younger days, because he probably still had it, and he probably was brilliant as a younger person, as an academic. Now he's just a craven asshole who's running around on his wife with how many different women? We get that, but we get scenes showing it. We don't need to only infer it. What Arnold Schwarzenegger, bodybuilder, not actor, and famously he and Jim Cameron on the set of True Lies, when James, and he hadn't really done this in the earlier movies they worked with, in Terminator 1 and even Terminator 2, because the role of the Terminator was limited. Cameron kept having Arnold do take after take after take of certain scenes. And Arnold was getting increasingly frustrated. And he finally said to him, Jim, I'm a bodybuilder, not an actor. But hey, you're getting paid to act, bro. Let's run it again. Arnold does real film acting, just in the brief moments where we see him as this other character of Hauser. His inflections are different. The look on his face is different. There's very little, other than the fact that they are the same person, but everything else is different about what we are presented with Doug Quaid and what we are presented with as Hauser by the star Arnold Schwarzenegger. And this is what Roger Ebert was getting at in the review on television. And if you look up, it's available, Siskel and Ebert, you can Google YouTube Siskel and Ebert Total Recall. But Roger Ebert's reviews, every review he wrote, with very few exceptions, from 1968 onward, is available digitized. You can find it. Arnold loved Total Recall. Now, Ebert passed in 2013, so he saw all of the big movies from Arnold's salad days. He felt this was far and away the Austrian Oak's best film acting. And he enjoyed movies like Kindergarten Cop and Twins, and he liked what Arnold was able to do. He loved him in The Terminator. But he actually leads off the print review. There are those who will dismiss the Arnold Schwarzenegger performance. He wasn't arguing that Arnold should be nominated or should win Best Actor, but he was saying, don't sleep on this. We didn't know this guy could do this because he hasn't been tested. They didn't ask him to do anything like this. And it's to the credit of the filmmaker, Paul Verhoeven, that he wanted to see what the guy could do. He wanted Arnold to stretch. And it's not easy to play two different characters, especially when you only have a couple of minutes as one of the characters. In this case, the pivotal character of Hauser. And just for reference, so you understand where I'm coming from here. In 2012, Hollywood put out a remake of Total Recall, which, from my understanding, is a little bit closer to Philip K. Dick's book in certain ways. Colin Farrell plays the main character, Doug Quaid. And he did something interesting with the casting of the actresses. They had Jessica Biel and Kate Beckinsale, both of them in the movie. Jessica Biel, I guess, is kind of playing the character played by Rachel Tickerton in the Arnold version, and Kate Beckinsale is playing the Sharon Stone character. But as far as performance, now Colin Farrell, for my money, should have won the Academy Award for Best Actor for films released in 2022. Banshees of Inisherin is a very difficult, often painful movie to watch, literally. It is a brilliant film. And what Colin Farrell does in that movie is easily his best film acting. It's a beautiful, moving performance, totally not what you expect from him, because he is a guy who is known, he's a very attractive man, he's athletic, and he's known for having a certain kind of swagger. And you saw it even in movies which weren't great, like Daredevil. He just acts everybody off the screen in Daredevil. He is a great actor. Whatever he does, he's great at. His performance in the 2012 Total Recall is not as good as what Arnold does in 1990. It's not about the acting chops and the talent in this instance. The role is not written as well in that movie. Kate Beckinsale is what you remember because she's phenomenal. But even the way Sharon Stone in the original was deployed, it's kind of more believable because Sharon's character disappears for huge chunks of the 1990 of the Arnold version. And when she comes back, you're not expecting. And you're not expecting at all what happens, except, other than I'll be back, this I'm going to have to spoil. Probably the next most memorable line ever uttered by Arnold Schwarzenegger is uttered at Sharon Stone as his wife, Lori. Sharon is in big trouble in this scene. Arnold has the drop on her. And she goes, "You wouldn't hurt me, would you, sweetheart? After all, we're married." And Arnold famously, in pure action hero mode, almost stepping out of the character of Doug Quaid for a moment to deliver a line like Dutch in Predator, "Stick around." Like Ben Richards in The Running Man, "He had to split. Yeah, he was a real pain in the neck. You wouldn't hurt me, would you, sweetheart? After all, we're married. Considered it a divorce." Perfect line reading. Everything in Total Recall works. And it is a movie that is a mindfuck movie. It's not an exaggeration. And there are plenty of movies in the 90s, The Usual Suspects, a mindfuck movie, where at the end you wonder to yourself, okay, what happened and what was a theoretical memory of this particular character that we don't know for sure happened? Total Recall is a memory movie. It is a classic as later in the decade. Fight Club, unreliable narrator, because we don't really know who the fuck the narrator is. In Total Recall, we are not sure at the beginning how much of this is real, and even at the end, how much of this is real. What did we just watch? Is this real? Or is this not? Is it live or is it Memorex, as Jeff Goldblum famously says in 1986's The Fly? Is it live or is it Memorex? Is it real or is it not real? I just had a horrible thought. Who among us hasn't had an amazing dream that we didn't realize was a dream? I just had a horrible thought. What if this is all a dream? Then kiss me quick before you wake up. There's so much beauty and poetry and style and wall-to-wall violence. This is a very bloody movie, and there were actually certain shots that Verhoeven had to pull. It's almost ridiculous because he got in trouble for Basic Instinct a few years later. The idea that an action movie could be rated NC-17, in immortal words of the Terminator, fuck you, asshole. No excuse for that. NC-17. So there were a couple of tiny little shots that had to be yanked, of like a knife going through somebody's head. Come on. It's not pornography. It's an action movie, for crying out loud. But at the end of the film, again, I'm not spoiling anything, just want to focus on Arnold, the early career path that he took, and the fact that this was the first movie where he really had the chance to show off. And you could say that in Twins, we didn't know he could be funny, but people in the business knew he could be funny, and he knew he could be funny. I don't think he surprised himself. I believe that what he does in Total Recall, he can look back on and say, that's some of my best work. That might be my best performance. And again, this is all subjective. There are people, not many, who don't like that movie. But on the other hand, there are people, if you polled 100 Arnold fans who go back with him to the Conan days, that before he really blew up and became a huge star, that will say that their favorite Arnold movie is Total Recall. More people will say Terminator 2. I know people who will say Terminator 2 is the best action movie ever made. Hands down. Forget the best summer movie ever made. For fuck's sake, absolutely. It's the best summer movie ever made. That's an example of a summer event movie that was teased for almost a year and ended up being better than anyone imagined. Another time where there were people in Hollywood probably hoping that James Cameron was going to fall on his face. Oops, he didn't. He knew exactly what he was doing. But in that movie, he got what he needed out of Arnold, because Arnold, as the Terminator, goes through different levels and has to emote. And I know now why you cry, but it's something I could never do, is an extraordinary line reading by a guy who had been a bodybuilder. But I feel like when Arnold said, I'm a bodybuilder, not an actor, I don't even know if he was taking a dig at himself. In that instance, I think he just wanted to move on to the next fucking scene, Jim. We did this stupid 40 times, bro. Let's move on to the next scene. Where's my buddy Clint Eastwood? 2 takes maximum. Let's move on to something else. I don't want to keep everyone here all day. We got other shit to do. It's true. Clint Eastwood doesn't like doing more than a couple of takes. Matt Damon has joked about it repeatedly. He says, I love this guy. Man, if you like working fast, Clint is your guy for sure. But when Total Recall comes to an end, and we are left with a whole host of questions which don't necessarily have answers. And the beauty of this kind of cinema, because I like a movie that has a closed book sort of ending, but even that can be played with, because Terminator 2 has a closed book ending, but not really, because they've made how many Terminator movies since then? Total Recall leaves you with a lot of questions and a lot of head scratching as to, well, what really did happen? And Arnold, and I love that he did this, he sat for a director's commentary about 20 or so years ago with Paul Verhoeven, who he continued to have a friendship with, even though I'm sure they butted heads and had some rough times, because this could not have been an easy shoot. But he sat for a director's commentary with Paul Verhoeven. And in that commentary, Arnold likes to believe that all of the events in the movie are real, that this is really what happened, and it was just a coincidence that, he was told this is what was going to happen, and it did happen. He likes to think, no, this really happened. Paul Verhoeven clearly believes life is but a dream. This was just a dream. But if we're being completely honest, whether or not we're fans of Arnold the person, or fans of Arnold the movie star, or maybe we're in our 20s and only know Arnold as the funny old guy who, sometimes posts videos with his pets in his kitchen eating cookies, Lulu, his donkey and all of that, the mini horse that he has. But if you are not familiar with this film, or you don't understand how Arnold Schwarzenegger became such a big star, this is an easier movie to throw at you than either of the first two Terminators. You'll see someone who did not really get into acting until relatively late, until he was already, 30-ish. And you'll see him do something unexpected. Because this isn't a movie that you would normally expect there to be two main characters, and this is not really, I don't really follow what's going on here. Oh yeah, now I do. But when it's all said and done, and the film was a monster, humongous box office hit, not as much as Terminator 2 the following summer, but a huge hit and a very high audience score. The Rotten Tomatoes number is probably better than any Arnold movie up to that point, although Predator also got very good reviews. But when the movie ends, if it's our first time seeing it, I defy you to not be impressed, to not say, I didn't know Arnold had that kind of acting ability. We knew he could do the one-liners, I'll be back, we've seen him be funny, but in this movie, he really makes you come to care deeply for one character who is more or less a decoy, and despise another character in just two scenes. Just two scenes, a few smiles, and a laugh. And that's the skill and the strength of the former Mr. Olympia, 7-time IFBB Mr. Olympia, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the little boy from Graz, Austria, who dreamed of coming to America to make a better life for himself, and succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imaginations except for his own. Arnold always dreamed big, and he still managed to exceed anything he could have envisioned. And maybe he didn't even know that he was going to be as good an actor as he turned out to be. Arnold Schwarzenegger as Doug Quaid and Hauser in Paul Verhoeven's 1990 mega classic sci-fi actioner Total Recall, the 10th entry in our continuing series of most underrated performances. This has been episode 131 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me here today. Once again, very much appreciated. But if you've caught this episode on the YouTube channel or enjoying the content, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch up with this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 132 real soon. Till then, peace.